right, everybody. Good evening to you all. It is a Tuesday night. It is February or March. Now we're into March 4th of 2024, 2025. Oops, I went back a year, and we're going to do a class tonight on the xLights controller tab. Now, in the email it says layout in the subject field, but I accidentally typed that in there. It should be the controller tab, not the layout tab. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to briefly go through some of the basics to what is in the layout tab, do a couple of simple explanations as to what you see in the layout tab. All right, so there's four basic things that I want to talk to you guys tonight about in the controller tab. The controller tab is our gateway to our network, and the big piece of the pie is the network. So to start with, the four things that we're going to discuss are the overview layout tab functions. We're also going to get into a basic understanding of networks and how to add and configure a controller into the controller tab. I have a controller sitting here ready to roll, and it is set up. And then I have one more thing I want to discuss, which is absolute channel numbering, and that's we don't use universes or universe numbers or channels or buckets or nothing like that to figure out our coding or numbering for our props so that the data goes to the right controller or to the right output or to the right part of your show, and however your grand show is going to be set up. But tonight's goal, this is all in the basic category, and I'm going to get started by going into the Windows search here, which I don't think you can see just at the moment, and I'm going to search for network. View network connections. I just typed view network connections and it popped up on my other screen. Yes. So now you can see this. You can see I have two adapters here. One is a wired network. It says one is unidentified. And then I have a wireless network, which is how I have connection into the internet. So off to my right here, which you may or may not be able to see very easily, is a small switch. This switch has two cables. One is going to my controller, and the other network cable is going down to my PC. It's connected directly to my network card in the back. But the important thing is I have the controller over here, which you might not be able to tell, but it's networked right in. Now, the first thing when we talk about a show network, we're just talking about a basic understanding of being able to talk to the controller from the computer, and I'm doing that with the wired network. Now, we have to start with network in order to figure this out in general to get our network connected. And what I've done here is I've double clicked on the Ethernet, which is the wired network. If maybe you're connecting to a wireless router or a wireless network, you might need to come in here and learn more about this. It might, but I'm going to go into my wired network, which is that switch over here, and I'm going to go ahead and click on properties, and I'm going to search for what I call TCP/IP version 4. That's this Internet Protocol version. And when I double click on this, I'm going to give myself a set of numbers. Now, I don't run my show network on the same as my internet home network. I have a separate computer. Maybe you have a Raspberry Pi or FPP, a BeagleBone, something like that runs your show. And it may run on the same network. I'm just doing this as if you are running this from a separate computer or a separate show player of some sort, and it doesn't run on your home network. So just the basics is all we need here. Now, I've given this computer here an IP address, a set of numbers. It says 192.168.2.1. And then I have a subnet mask here, which says 255.255.255.0. I don't need to fill anything else here into this screen. There's no other functionality that I need to add in here in order to make a connection to my computer or to my controller. The only thing I do need to know is if on my controller, is it connected to that network using the same IP address. And the same IP address would be the first three sets of numbers, 192.168.2. As long as those first three numbers are the same on my controller here, that's a good thing, because the last number needs to be something different. So imagine that this is house number 1 on your street. You need your controller to be a different number, so it knows to go to house number 2 on the street. And another controller might be house number 3, or controller number 3, or number 4, or number 5. And it goes all the way up to 255. That's what's allowed to be on your local network before it can't communicate anymore. So with those basics, this IP address on this controller, I think, is .2, push the button here, .2.60. And so that's definitely something that we'll be easily able to work with. Now we have the network side of things kind of taken care of. The next thing that we're going to do is just kind of walk through what the controller tab is and does. And the controller tab, number one, it is exactly what it says it is. It is a location in xLights that you enter your controllers into. Now, there's nothing listed here. That's because this is a blank layout. There's nothing in here. This is just for tonight's demo. And I want to start with, if you are new to xLights, and if you're watching this video, this is geared to new folks. If you are already a 5, 6, 7 year veteran, you're probably going to find everything we talk about tonight might be a little bit more stale or boring because we've repeated it. But the important thing is that if you're new and along for the ride, or you just need a good refresher, that's what we're going to go through tonight. The first two buttons you see at the top of your screen, it says directories at the top right-hand side of the box here. And what directories does or shows is that you have two different options to changing a directory. You can change permanently or you can change temporarily. The change permanently would be if you were changing from, let's say, your Christmas layout and you had another folder with your Halloween layout, and you had another folder with your let's say 4th of July layout, or another folder with your Labor Day layout, or whatever, insert any holiday, Easter, Valentine's Day. If you had a special layout for a special event, you could change your directory permanently to another one. Now, see, we have another one here called Change Temporarily. Change Temporarily was an addition made into xLights. And the functionality of this was helpful when the old way of packaging and downloading a sequence from a vendor, we'll say, or sharing a sequence was quite complicated. During the let me see here. During the years of let's see, there we go. During the years of let's say 2015, 16, 17, 18, xLights users had learned that there was a way to package a sequence. And in order to share all of the items in the sequence, that package had to zip up all the images, all the video files. That was before there were shaders. And in order to relink those image files, those shader files, those individual shader files, the video files, in order to link them back to the sequence, what you as a user had to do was you had to change your directory. And there was only a change permanent button at that time, and it wasn't called change permanent, it just said change directory. And you unpacked the sequence that you downloaded into your download folder inside your directory, inside your xLights show folder, and you would change your directory into that. And so, well, that became quite confusing because some people would forget where their original xLights directory was after they had temporarily made that change. So the change temporarily came in very handy as a way to, I'm in my show folder here, but I want to change temporarily to this downloaded zip file folder. And whenever I export this folder, I can go in and I can look at the downloaded file and how they set it up, and I can open the sequence in their layout. Today, I think the most people that are using the change temporary are the people that are kind of like myself. Perhaps you are temporarily changing from one client's layout to another client's layout. And it brings you back into your home layout or the layout you spend most of your time in. So that's what Change Temporarily does. It just allows you to change temporarily from one layout into, like, here's our Halloween Pro or Halloween Original. Nothing crazy. So you can, and these are all functionalities that are still built in. You can go in and do that, change temporarily. I'll show you this. It's asking me to save. Don't worry about this little error. This is the Halloween layout here. And notice how it says restore to permanent. You can change temporarily again if you want to bounce to another one. Otherwise, if you want to go back to your original, just click restore to permanent. Now it sends you back to our test layout for tonight where we're talking about the controller tab. You can see here that the controller tab has a save button. Anytime a change has been made in the controller's page, you can click the save button whenever it's red. So that will create a brand new network RGB xLights underscore network file in your show folder that will update that file. Previous to today, this file didn't exist, and now it does. So a USB, if we click add USB, what USB is a way for you to send serial data out a USB port on the PC, or perhaps even a way to do it from the Raspberry Pi or maybe even the BeagleBone Black. I think that it does that. I'm not sure if it does or not. But I would imagine that in some instances, I know that back in the day, I used to use the LOR serial dongle, and it would connect the LOR controller boxes to the xLights layout, so you could then utilize LOR boxes. When I first began using that USB back in 2015, it didn't work very well. It stuttered, and so we learned that there were other ways that you could get DMX data out instead of using a USB. But this works. The functionality of this works much better now than it used to. Now, I've added this here in order to get rid of it. I think I should be able to either right-click and delete. You can also inactivate something. But I don't need this here, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And it'll say, are you sure you want to delete one controllers? And I'm going to click yes. So now it's gone. The next one is Add Ethernet. If we click the Add Ethernet button, this is how you set up a controller inside your show. Mechanically, what Add Ethernet does is allows you to build the parameters of your controller. Now, there are a couple of functions in here that are very nice. The first thing I would always do is I would give a description of this controller, or more specifically, I would give it a description of where it's located in your show or what kind of props it runs. Maybe this is your Megatree controller. Maybe this is yard controller left. Maybe this is yard controller right. Maybe this is yard controller 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, or house controller 1, 2, 3, or roof controller. But I like to be very specific so that I can look at it and say, oh, that's the one that goes on the roof. And that way you don't have to remember what IP address is assigned to it. The next thing you see here, this is a vendor setup. And this vendor setup here allows you to select from a list of known vendors that have xLights controllers that have been programmed into xLights. And the reason why this might be helpful or useful is going to be because xLights has gone through taking the time of assigning parameters that allow that controller to be understood thoroughly by xLights, or as best as it can, and be able to communicate with it, knowing that it may have limitations. So let me point out a couple of these so that it makes a little bit more sense. So if you have an Xlights controller, there are a couple different versions. Some are Xlights 16, Genius 16. Some of them are Genius Pro 16. Some of them are Genius Pro 32s. And that's where the model, you need to know what model you might have for some of these. Now, this one here, we can put whatever we want in here. I'm not connecting one. It might be a Genius 8 controller. It might be a Genius 16. You see all the options here. And if it's a long range, that's one that's a distribution controller only. It doesn't have an onboard output. It has differential. It's more of a differential board. And so those are the options. You would select the one that you're actually connecting, and I'll just go ahead and follow along with it. We'll say that's a Genius Long Range. You can give the ID something that you want to give it. I believe I would start with ID 1 and ID Universe. I would leave this alone if you don't really need to. xLights will kind of autofill it in. Then you have some other functions in here, and what's nice is xLights has, whenever I point at these, they change. These are tooltips, and one of the nice things about xLights is if it knows what the controller is, xLights can control or use functions built into xLights to help auto layout with the models, help auto size the models, and it gives it can give xLights full xLights control over the controller. In other words, where when you move something around in the controller, xLights will understand what you mean by moving it around, and it will channel it appropriately. And it's really nice. This is way different than it used to be back in the day. And I don't even want to go over some of those things that we used to do. But suffice to say, if your controller isn't here on this list, if it doesn't exist, what you'll do is you'll just leave this blank. And you would have to add an IP address in here for the controller. You would also want to select your protocol, which is typically, if it's a controller that is a standard Pixel controller, usually it's going to be through E131 or possibly ArtNet that you're going to make your connection through. And that's usually the E131 or ArtNet. That's usually through a network cable, kind of like this one here that I've got sitting here. It's a network connection to the back of the PC, just like we set up the adapter at the very beginning. Now, there are some options in here under protocol, and I'll mention this briefly because this is a question that gets asked quite a bit, and that would be which protocol is best. And to be honest, as long as the protocol works and does the job, that's the one that works, so you can use it. ArtNet is old school, E131 is newer old school, and DDP is new school. DDP is from over the past few years, the conversations we've had in the Zoom room here, a number of people who have said that it is a much more efficient way to send pixel data out, and that is exactly what we use it for, is sending pixel data out. So if your controllers, we recommend if your controller can use DDP, and some controllers that do use DDP are something like a Raspberry Pi or a BeagleBone Black. Those controllers use DDP. It's best to set those controllers up for DDP. Then use that protocol in here if you're adding this mechanically. Now, the IP address, we talked about IP address earlier, so we would, if we were adding a controller, we would have to type that in here. That would be 2.2.60 happens to be this controller that I've got sitting over here to my right. So this is what's nice is it's step by step going down through this. Now I want to go back and I want to throw the vendor in here really quick. I'm going to put the Falcon in here, and I'm going to put an F16 V3 because that's what I happen to have connected here right now. We can change this. I like it to be ID1 because it's the first one on the list. It's not a requirement by any means, but I wanted to look at this auto layout models, and what we see here is auto layout models causes xLights, and I'm just reading the tooltip, causes xLights to move models around in the controller channel range to optimize them. It also needs to be set to allow you to move models in the visualizer between the controllers. Now, we don't have anything in the layout tab, so we don't have any models, so we're not really playing with models. We can if we want to later on. Actually, the Twinkle Tip Friday video that's going to post this week is going to talk all about models, especially these cute little snowmen that are behind me. Next, we have auto size. And what is auto size? This option will cause xLights to dynamically resize the number of channels on the controller to ensure they're exactly enough for the models on the controller. In the past, we used to use number of universes and channels to determine how many channels were on a controller period. You could put so many universes on a controller, but you necessarily weren't using all those channels. And what would happen is if you had 2 or 3 controllers and designated, let's say, 50 universes or 50 universes of channels, then what would happen is you might have a bunch of those channels you never used, but when you rendered your sequence, xLights was rendering those blank channels or those unused channels. That's what auto size does, is it removes the need for you to manually calculate the number of channels or universes that you need, and it allows xLights to keep track of that for you seamlessly as you add and take away models rather from the xLights layout. So, and the last thing here is full xLights control. Again, just reading from the tooltip, this option will, when uploading, erase the configuration of all unused ports on the controller per the configuration in xLights. So this is, again, this gives xLights that control. Default port brightness. Not every controller has default port brightness. What that means is the ability to output or set what you want your pixels to be set to brightness on and uploaded to the controller. So if you, like I'm using the V3, if I'm running 5-volt pixels on these snowmen back here, and it's connected into this controller, I can set it to 30% and upload my configuration to this. And when I do, it will automatically set the outputs that are active with pixel data to 30% brightness. And it does it without you having to go into the controller and configuring it manually. Active simply means that the controller is active in your layout, or you can enact or deactivate it. You can have monitor. Monitor does auto check, I think, when we go through the discovery process. Suppress duplicate frames. This is something that if you are, we usually check this when we're outputting data. It keeps duplicate frames from being sent out from xLights. Meaning if you're testing from xLights, that suppresses the duplicate frames. We already talked about the IP address, the FPP proxy IP host name. This, according to the tooltip, this is typically the Wi-Fi IP of an FPP instance that bridges 2 networks together. So basically, and this was an interesting understanding because I'm a very basic person whenever it comes to networking. I'm not ever going to claim to know more. There are some really good classes we've all taken. If you want to learn more about proxy and connecting to different to different devices from one way through like a portal into another network, then this is what you would use. Let's say your FPP proxy is on your FPP is on a different network and your portal is through that. Then you would put your host name in there and so forth. The protocol, we talked about that. Force local IP. This just gives you the chance to tell xLights, hey, when I output data from xLights, I want it to always go out this adapter. And so I could say 192.168.2.1. That's what I set up to run off of this little switch right here. So that's there for us. And if we had models, there you would see a faint list, a faded list that would go across the screen here with names of models that are attached to it. So if this were your Megatree model, you'd see the Megatree would be there. Channels per packet. I've never touched this. I've never used it. But if we go into it, it says it would be very rare that you would ever want to change this from the default. So if you are an advanced user, then this is something that maybe you've talked to a developer and have a better understanding use for, but you don't need to make any changes. It says keep channel numbers. When not selected, DDP data arrives at each controller looking like it starts at channel 1. When selected, it arrives with the xLights channel number. So we can see universe ID 1 here. Channels 510, 1 through 510 is what's assigned to this controller. The more pixels we add, or excuse me, the more props that we add and the higher the pixel count, and it's all attached to this controller, the higher that number will go. It will auto-fill, auto-size, as we said earlier today, that it will auto-size to fit anything that you put into there, barring that the controller can manage to have that many pixels on it. Channels would be mechanical or manually added if you were not using xLights auto size and you were manually entering in a controller that doesn't appear in xLights. So this Falcon does appear in xLights. If there was no controller variant here, if we got rid of that, if we got rid of this and we didn't have a vendor, xLights couldn't keep it managed, or couldn't keep it you couldn't manually remove this, and you could set your channels to whatever channels that you want to keep on this controller. Manage says nothing. I'm not familiar with what managed or unmanaged does, but I have a feeling it has something to do with xLights watching over it in one manner or another. So those are your basic functionalities for Add Ethernet. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. The last three buttons are my favorite. Well, the last two here are my favorite. If you click Add Null, one of the things that you'll see here is that this is just channel based, and the people who would use a null controller would be somebody like us. We have a layout with the PPD layout, the original, the Pro layout. Any of these layouts that we're going to use are going to be something that doesn't need a controller in order for us to program with. So for example, if we were in the original layout or the Pro layout, all of the props would have a set of channels assigned to them based on the number of pixels in them, but they wouldn't be assigned to an output to a controller. There's none needed. And so therefore, and let me go move my camera a little bit there. You can see down here in the bottom right, there are some other buttons, and when we have this selected, there's no ability to visualize. So if there was a controller, if there were models in the layout tab, then this visualize would pop up and show as available if it were a regular controller. But since this is a null controller and it's just there to cover the correct number of channels for all the props, that's what that would be for. So we use this on our storefront controller, or storefront page for our sequencing, and basically that's it. So there might be some other uses for this that I'm not mentioning, so forgive me if there are. If you're watching the video in the after, by all means, feel free to comment on something. If you have a better description or something you'd like to share, be grateful to hear from you. My favorite button in xLights is absolutely got to be the Discover. I'm going to go ahead and delete this here. My favorite button is Discover, and here's why. Now, keep in mind, this controller, it's plugged in. It is networked. We've already talked about the network. And if you have a controller that is listed in xLights, the vendor is there, and the IP addresses match the local network adapter that you set up in your PC, you can click the Discover button here, and poof, xLights will find any controller that is on the local network that you have set up. And so in this instance, you see here, this is a F16 V3. All of the information auto fills in for it. In this instance, xLights understands that there's 2 expansion boards on this controller. There actually is only 1 expansion board. So we could do 1 expansion board here. That would be correct. And that would be accurate, right? There would be as accurate as this controller needs to be in order for me to make this useful in any demonstration or any use for any show. And it fills it in. I mean, there's V3s on there, Falcon's the vendor, and now, of course, I had to correct that. It thought that there was a second expansion board. Now, the reason why discovery is nice is because xLights can discover certain controllers. There are many controllers that cannot be discovered by xLights. I want to say that controllers that run off of, what's the name of that firmware? WLED cannot be at this time. They can't be discovered or are discoverable by xLights at the moment. I don't know how hard the developers, or if it's even possible to do that for those. The Wasatch Pixel controllers, the RGB to go controllers. There's a couple different controllers that it can't use the Discover for, but it is an option, and it is something that you can take advantage of. Again, one of my favorites. If you are running FPP Connect, you can also use FPP Connect. It will find any local edition of FPP that is on your network, and it will allow you to do the upload too. Meaning you could, if you had media types and models, you could upload all of that data. That would be, you could work through this screen. It can do a lot of things through the screen. I'm not as familiar. The FPP Connect button wasn't there for a long time, so I don't know when they added this. I can't speak from experience, but I do remember if I used to go into Tools and I used to find it over underneath here, FPP Connect, but they actually added it into the layout or the controller tab, yeah, so there is basically the main functions that you have in the xLights controller tab. Now, the only other things I want to do is I want to add. Well, I don't really have to add. I could go in here. Let's see. Let me see if I can import a prop from another layout that I have here. Maybe I can find one real quick. Let's go into I grabbed the wrong one. Right click, import models, Pro, Twinkle Tip Friday, Snowman model. So this is I'm going in and finding an RGB effects file that I was working with last week. And I'm bringing in the snowman of the snowman you see behind me. So we could actually mess around with this and actually output the lights. But I wanted to bring this in, and here's why. So now once we have a controller in xLights, what we can do is we can visualize what the controller has. Now remember that we have here a number of outputs. I have one expansion board on here, and the Falcon automatically has 4 serial ports that are already attached to it. So having the vendor model and variant loaded onto here works great to populate exactly how many outputs that board possibly could have assigned to it. If there were 2 expansion boards on here, I could come in here, 2 expansion boards, change that. Now, if we go into visualize, notice what happens. We went from 32 outputs all the way up to 48, because that's as far as this controller can be expanded to. So, of course, we don't need to do that. I'm going to leave that back at 1, just so that you can see that. And we'll go back and we'll click on the visualize. You can see here, this is our snowman, and xLights auto populated him to the first output, and that's because that's where he was located on the other layout. I've done this a little bit before, so I kind of knew where to go. But to simply pull your prop over and place it onto the port that you want it to, you can just click and drag. The snowman has 113 pixels there, or it's actually 112. I don't know where the 13th came from. But that's it's populating the pixel number or pixel count to the appropriate port. And then it keeps that number in its brain, and if we come over here, we can see if we expand past 510 channels, xLights will expand to add more channels in. So the next thing we have here is we have a couple other buttons down here on the bottom. We have an upload input, which is grayed out, and the reason why it's grayed out, if I go into xLights preferences here, I think there is on on the other page, I think there is a link save. See where it says controllers and layout tab. Link the save button here. You can link those. And then you can also link controller uploads, inputs and outputs. So if you use the input and output link, like I have this selected, these two, so anytime I hit the save button, it's also going to save the layout. See how the layout says save there? If I hit save now and I go back here, the save button is already, those two are linked. And then also the upload input and the upload output are linked exactly the same way. And if you take the time here and you do lock the two, xLights can upload from the layout if you've already configured or visualized this and set up your props already. It will upload the configuration, and then it will, and you can see down here at the bottom will say Falcon output upload complete. So it'll do the upload input and then it'll do the upload output. So those are two different steps. I linked the buttons, so it's only one step for me. That you don't have to have them linked, so you can do them one at a time. But it kind of made sense to have that function or that extra addition. So right now, if we open up the controller, we can click on this button that says open. Now here, just opened up on this other screen. Here is the Falcon controller. If we go to string ports, we can click on the string ports and we can see Snowman. He's on there. He has 113 pixels. That's what xLights says he had. And that is, this is our start universe, and this is our end channel is 339. Now, I started today out at one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the absolute channel numbering. Absolute channel numbering, if you had multiple controllers, would take from the number one starting on the first controller, and it would use number one in that controller, and it would say, how many props do I have down the list? Snowman, Snowman, Megatree, blah, 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 blah. Everything on that controller, it would total the pixels, and it would say, start channel number one, end channel X. And then if you had a second controller, if you had two controllers here, on the second controller, it would start at X plus 1. So whatever your end channel was on your first pixel controller, it would be the same start channel plus 1 on your second controller, and it would take absolutely every number to fill in all of the pixel data to assign the network and output to lights data that is going out to your pixel strings. So absolute channeling is probably one of the easiest ways to understand and do the hobby. We're also familiar with universe start channels. So some people like to use universe 1, start channel 1, and they have one prop that's 100 pixels and they use 300 channels for it. And if they have second prop on the second output, they like to use universe 2, start channel 1, and they have 100 pixels on that output as well. And it goes to channel number universe 2, channel number 300, and then they start on universe number 3 and channel number 1 and output and end channel would be 300, we'll say. So that would be the progression of here in this, what you see here, a different way to think about it. I'm not trying to confuse you, but there are different ways to think about channeling, and I'm just doing my best to kind of help you understand that we are much more in favor of the absolute channeling because it becomes easier for xLights to manage it in the long run, and there's far less chance of having overlap, although overlap can happen. So that is the open. When you click the open button, it does open up your controller if it has a GUI, a graphic user interface. If you have like a xLights 16, those don't have GUIs. They have an app that you download, and that's the way that you make your configuration for that controller. So let's see. There is an open proxy button and a delete button. I would venture to say that if I went to delete this controller, it would say, would you want to delete this controller? That's what I thought. I didn't think about the delete button being down there. I always just right click here. I want to say that the delete button used to be over here, but this interface has changed slightly over the years. So, and the last thing on here that we have, there's two more things. We have this open proxy. If we were using a proxy to get to an IP address that's on the network, and we're trying to portal through into, let's say, an FPP instance to get information out, that's a way to do it. Now, that's beyond what my standard understanding of it is, but it is a function. If you're more of a network guru, you probably have an idea what that would be useful for. And from what I talked to Robert about earlier today, that is exactly what he would use it for if he's using it for his FPP instances. So the last thing I want to talk about is, and I give a good friend of mine a shout out, Jeff and Jennifer. They call this the Apple. It's actually a fake LED. And whenever you don't have a controller connected, this is kind of a red apple. And if you have a controller connected, it's a green one. And basically, Jeff and Jennifer know that if they have their controller connected to their network, just like I like to do here, I have it sitting here on my desk. I have the controller plugged in right here to it, and I have xLights open. And if this were my show folder, and I were going through and I wanted to make sure that each of my controllers could be seen by my show computer, you could certainly do this. In fact, I highly recommend it. That if you have your show computer opened up, put your controllers on them, plug them in. If you've already made your assignments for the season, by all means, upload them now. Put them in there, and then you can go out to your show and just start one by one plugging in your props to your outputs, and you can begin testing them. That's pretty much everything I have over the entire setup of the controller tab. I don't want to get too more bogged down. I'm going to read a couple things in the chat here. It looks like I have been corrected. Some of the controllers that are running the WLED do seem to have the ability to be discovered. So I am being corrected there. So it may work. WLED are discovered, and this is from Ron Armstrong. He says, are discovered via the discovery. Yes, it does not populate all the settings, though. So it's unable to populate all the settings. FPP Connect button was added late last year, so that is definitely new. I was not familiar with it. I didn't remember seeing it whenever I looked last. Now, I was talking about active earlier, and Alex answered a question in chat. He said active is for those controllers. Let's see. Where was that at? Active, right here. Active is for those controllers that need to receive data to work. Falcon's Genius, whereas xLights only is for FPP-based controllers, or Falcon's Genius ES Pixel Sticks with SD cards that act as an FPP remote. So that would be that'd be very helpful to know that. It's not something I actually used. I am going to leave it right there, folks. Remember that every week, every Tuesday night, we get together here in the PPD Zoom room. You all are welcome to join us. If you're watching on Facebook, you're welcome to jump in the Zoom room right now. Head on over to pixelprodisplays.com. When you do, you want to click on the link at the top of the page that says Learning, and hover over it, and you'll see a link to our PPD Zoom webinar. You can join us in our PPD Zoom. You're welcome to join us now. If you're watching on YouTube, because we're going to upload this, thank you for watching. We hope these videos are helpful and save you some time and frustration with the hobby. And by all means, if you have suggestions on things that you'd like to see, if you're getting started with the hobby, or you're trying to do something and you're having challenges or frustrations, put your comments in below. If you have anything else that you're looking to do in xLights, we welcome you to come into our every week we do the PPD Zoom room, so you can come in and ask those questions. We don't record those sessions only because people seem to hide away from wanting to be in the spotlight. So huge thank you to everybody tonight. We're going to leave it right here. We do have a couple giveaways to do. I have two giveaways that I can talk about. But we're going to save the Guess the Sequence contest for a live drawing for tomorrow night. So everybody, thank you for joining us. Clyde here signing out. Robert, huge thank you for getting us online and putting us through. So everybody have a good evening. Thank you, and take care, and goodbye for now.